True or false? The best way to break a belief about what's possible is to see someone do something that you thought was impossible. Maybe you've heard the story of Roger Bannister. In the 1950s, it was thought to be impossible to run a 4-minute mile until Roger came along and broke the record. But then, a year later, everyone and their mother were running 4-minute miles. What changed? The belief that it was possible. Believing is the secret to achieving. This applies to life and business, which is why the Yogipreneur is so powerful. Plugging into a place with like-minded people, sharing struggles and successes breaks any limiting beliefs slowing you down. The Yogipreneur is a 4-month mastermind for yoga teachers who are ready to break free from the limitations of the studio, are eager to start building a flourishing yoga business, and who want to know what it takes to create impactful and profitable offers of their own. Enrollment is now open, but only from August 11th to the 24th, 2024. During the Yogipreneur, you'll gain access to 12 of my top business trainings made by a yoga teacher for yoga teachers. We'll talk about igniting your entrepreneurial spirit, act like a boss, expanding your dharma, explore opportunities outside the studio, designing heart-centered offers, sketch out your service, facing technophobia, set up your softwares, finding your voice, share your yoga journey with confidence, healing your money blocks, flow into financial abundance, marketing mindfully, promote your practice, selling with integrity, create transformation, not transactions, serving your students, deliver and exceed expectations, managing time and energy, protect your prana, sustaining success, automate your yoga business systems, and maintaining pure intentions, fix your mindset. You'll get your hands on helpful resources like Charging Your Worth worksheet, captivating copy codes, terrific testimonials template, launch survival guide, sales page outlines, sales call guidelines, sample contracts, ChatGPT prompts to supercharge your ideas, and more. Are you intrigued yet? After the weekly live trainings, stay on to ask your burning questions and get some answers through hot seat coaching. Plus, you'll be invited into our private IG chat so you can make friends and feel supported the whole time. It's a place to share the highs, the lows, and everything in between. I'm even throwing in 10 plus hours of guided meditations and EFT tapping tracks to help rewire your beliefs and subconscious programming. This is the first ever round of the Yogipreneur Mastermind. Since it's a pilot program, the people inside will have the most contact time with me, Mackenzie Fly, and receive all the goods at the lowest price ever. If flourishing as a yoga teacher has felt like the 4-minute mile, impossible, the Yogipreneur Mastermind is for you. Sure, you could do it alone. It's just you could get there a lot faster with help. Click the link in the show notes or visit yogipreneurmastermind.com for all the details. Register before August 24th, 2024. We start in September.
The thing that challenges teachers the most when I interact with teachers and just watching and leading teacher trainings, knowing how to objectively evaluate what you are doing. Even if a teacher doesn't acknowledge that that's the case. The one person I know who's never taken my class is me, and I'll never get to. Mackenzie knows my class better than I ever will because she's been present in it. And that's the nice thing about that is it goes, in both directions. There's a degree to which I understand Mackenzie's class in a way Mackenzie never will because you've not taken your own class. And even if we record ourselves, which to your listeners, you all should, even if you record yourself and listen back and evaluate it, the most effective way to learn is to get feedback from others. And yet, that's not going to happen every class. The vast majority of classes you teach, even if a teacher's present, you're not really going to have time. We try to do as much as we can in theory every class, but there might not be a teacher in every class. And people have lives. You're not going to always be able to make a tremendous amount of time for it. So how to take what you've learned about teaching and knowing which things you want to improve on, and then knowing whether or not you're implementing it. So basically, trying to find a way to be objective about oneself and what you're delivering and why, and all of the different things that could fall under that larger umbrella about understanding what your voice is and how to make adjustments.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to MYYT, where you are learning to level up your yoga teaching one masterful class at a time. I feel like a new woman. Within the last couple of days, have gotten a manicure and a pedicure. My nails are nice. Just 2 hours ago, I got a hair appointment, a ton of highlights to really lift and brighten my face. I got to sleep in past 5 a.m. for 2 days in a row. I took a public yoga class, and I'm just like, wow, what is this deluxe treatment? I cannot give enough thanks and a huge shout out to my mom, Linda Fly. We can all affectionately call her Mama Bear. She came in and honestly was just such an angel. She goes, "How can I spoil you?" And the first thing I said is I was like, I want to go take 3 days of yoga in a row was the initial plan. And then of course, when the time came around, I was like, man, I also could just use a little extra sleep too. But I was so glad to get out and practice in public. Being a new mom, my baby's 9 months. So being a new mom, I'm mostly just practicing at home these days. So it felt so nice to get out there and sweat. I also feel like I've been able to eat a little bit more since somebody else is there to kind of help hold the baby. I haven't really noticed this, but now after having eaten a couple of really good meals, I'm like, I guess what's happening is that while I'm feeding Finn, we're just doing kind of baby-led weaning. So I'm feeding him what I'm eating. And then I end up giving him half of my food. And here I am wondering why I feel so hungry all the time. So anyway, I'm trying to express to you is I feel brand spanking new nails, new hair, got some sleep, eating more food, did a yoga practice. Moms are amazing. So thank you, Linda Fly, if you were listening. I literally would not be here without you. And it was so nice to be spoiled this last week. So I hope that you too have had some sort of help, or maybe you take this as your sign to send a text to your mom, like, thank you for all you do for me. I love you. But I just had to start with that and just tell you that it feels so good to receive that help. I am also in the second week of the doors being open for the Yogipreneur Mastermind. And I am so excited for this program. I truly feel like it is the thing that I wish I had when I was kind of starting out, really kind of going all in on this whole yogi trying to be an entrepreneur thing. And if I would have had this in the beginning, I feel like I could have saved so much time, so much stress and struggle and worry. And I'm so happy to be in the place now to share all the things that I've learned in the last 4 years of trial and error. So I've had an absolute blast talking with some of you on social media or emailing back and forth, answering questions about what the program is going to be like. So if that's you and you're kind of thinking about it, please hit me up if we're in real time. The doors to the mastermind close August 24th. So if you're listening in real time on Wednesday, it's just till this weekend. So please reach out. I'd love to answer your questions about that. Other things that I'm celebrating is in my retreat company, Rachaka Retreats, we have officially put down 2 deposits for our retreats next year. We are going to Costa Rica for our yoga teacher training, which that's another thing that we're celebrating is our yoga teacher training application and manual has been approved by the Yoga Alliance. So that means we are kind of getting everything together as far as recording the pre-recorded content, getting the actual retreat facility booked for the last week or the immersion. So many moving things just in Rachaka land between the actual offering of our own YTT manual for the very first time and next fall, we are going to Bali. So looking at all of these beautiful retreat facilities, put down the deposits, we've officially locked in the dates, and we're doing everything on the back end, like building out the websites, all of the automations. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my God, Mackenzie, you're doing it. And you are doing it on such a bigger scale than you would have thought. And I say that just to kind of encourage you that wherever you are kind of in the journey and you're trying to figure out what it is your offer, what you want to do, and you're kind of dreaming big, but you don't really know how you're going to get there, just keep showing up every day and doing a little bit of work. And I promise you, one day you're going to look down and be like, oh my gosh, I just did all of these automations, or I just built this yoga website, when at this moment right now feels really hard, but a little bit later, you're just going to kind of bust out some of those tasks that seemed so not your style, or like you didn't even know how to do it, or it really stressed you out. And now it's like not that big of a deal because you've been doing it for a while. So I had that kind of moment, being impressed with myself and my growth. And if I can do it, you can do it. And I have to say just one more time, that's really kind of what we talk about in the Yogipreneur Mastermind. So that might be another space where you're kind of like, okay, I really want to go for it, but I need lots of help and some education along the way. That's where you're going to get it. Speaking of past me, this conversation was so, I don't know, beautiful, I guess, lovely for me to have. He is a dear friend, and probably, like I say in the episode, the reason why my life took the trajectory and the path that it did is because of this person and his influence. So I'm so glad to share this conversation with you. It's with Eric Jeffers, and he is a real life Cirque du Soleil clown. And we got really into tons of topics within this episode, but specifically, we talked about things like his performance background as a ballet and modern dancer and his time clowning around in the prestigious Cirque du Soleil here in Las Vegas. We chatted about what being in a leadership role for a mega corporation is like and a day in the life of managing 3 massive clubs in Southern California. He told us how to give and receive feedback well and gave us an easy to use framework to follow to develop your skills, whether or not you have a supportive community or coach. We talked about the gift of complacency and the reminder that you didn't even know you needed to hear for the times when you feel bored in your teaching. He shared his unique way of defining getting better and the 3 keys that prove that you're on the right path. The exposure, the discomfort, the torture of training for a clown and how that shows up in his teaching. We talked about, is the yoga boom over? And lastly, the hard to put your finger on quality that employers look for when they are hiring yoga teachers. This episode is so insightful. I know you're going to love it. So turn it up and let's dive in. Hey yogis, Mackenzie Fly here, mom, yogapreneur, teacher trainer, retreat leader, and your guide to master your yoga teaching. This podcast is your weekly dose of actionable wisdom and candid chats with industry experts. Learn to connect deeper, weave yogic magic, and lead by example. Full disclosure, I'm still mastering it too, but together we'll skyrocket your impact and income. Hit subscribe and let's grow, one episode at a time. Eric Jeffers, when asked to send in his bio, he, no joke, responded with, I teach yoga and I'm a clown sometimes. Welcome to the podcast, Eric Jeffers. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here, Mackenzie. It's so good to see you. That's accurate. I teach yoga and sometimes I am a clown. No longer professionally. Now it's purely being a clown for my own personal reasons and for joy. I used to be paid to be an idiot, but now that's not really a part of my profession. Now I'm mostly teaching yoga, really entirely. I make my whole living from teaching yoga.
That's awesome. We'll definitely dive into it a little. I feel like you're being somewhat cryptic about what kind of clown you were. So what was that season of your life like, and where have you had the opportunity to perform?
Well, there's some overlap. So I guess it's relevant in this context. I started practicing yoga in, I think, 1997 or 1998, so quite some time ago. But I found yoga right at the beginning of a pretty long performance career. I performed for a little over a decade as a professional dancer, first 6 years in a ballet company, then touring for 4 years with a modern dance company. After I left dance, I moved into doing theater. I happened to be, briefly in New York, but after briefly in New York, I was mostly in Chicago where I started doing theater. So there's a lot of very avant-garde work, and I just picked up a lot of very random skills. And those translated eventually into joining Cirque du Soleil. I performed Cirque du Soleil for 7 years. And after about 20 years of performance, I transitioned out of it into teaching yoga and leading teacher trainings. Just yoga is my job for only the last 7 or 8 years. But the overlap is interesting because, like a lot of people who might be watching this, yoga was, for the first decade at least, supplemental income. So it was one of the ways I made my living. So I started teaching yoga in about 2003. But yeah, during the years in Cirque du Soleil, I unexpectedly ended up as the understudy for one of the clowns in the second of the 3 shows I did. And so it was very much a sink or swim situation, but I fell in love with it. It's really difficult work studying clown, not American red-nosed circus clown, but the tradition that includes things like Commedia dell'arte and physical theater, think Charlie Chaplin and Blue Man Group. I mean, there's whole disparate disciplines that you really could call all of them clown. And so it's the only type of performance I still engage in. Just once in a while, I try to be in clown classes because they're miserably hard and make me really uncomfortable. And that's healthy for all of us. So I just did a show Wednesday for the first time in about a year.
Nice. How'd it go?
It was an absolute failure because it was a clown show. That's how it was fun. It was really fun. Clowns don't tend to succeed at things. So
I feel like you're one of those rare people that really understands. There's phrases kind of in the yoga world that's like, this isn't circus, this is yoga, or this isn't performance, this is yoga. And you come from kind of both of those.
we could end up talking about that for all of our time. I have such mixed feelings about that because that is one of those things where people love to make declarative statements about something that they have very little knowledge on, right? Like I can do a cartwheel. It doesn't mean I was an acrobat. Some of the most disciplined, awake, loving individuals I've ever met were acrobats who could do anything with their body and would never have called any of it yoga. And I've met lots of acrobats who could do anything with their body and were no more awake or aware than anyone else, right? Like, so one doesn't necessarily follow. So there really is an interesting lesson there about, what we're doing is often very physical, but it is not circus.
Well, let's back it up and tell everybody how you and I know one another, because I have such a soft, loving corner in my heart for you, Eric Jeffers, because you really are the reason that my life took the path that it did when it comes to my profession of teaching yoga. I don't even really know how to say it quickly, but I guess you basically are the one person that was like, no, you really should believe in this girl. You should hire this girl. And you were kind of my biggest cheerleader and biggest promoter in the very beginning. And I would go as far as to say, to the extent of me actually getting the position and getting hired, when I was very, very young, I didn't have tons of experience. And you were a huge part of the mentorship and development of me and my teaching. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you, and then hear how it was from your side, because I know what it was like to live it from my vantage point, but I'd love to hear it from you.
I appreciate the gratitude and your generosity, your kindness. That's very sweet. But let's, for historical reasons, correct the record. No, I was a huge cheerleader of yours. It was very easy. I do remember it very clearly because I had just taken on a leadership role for the first time. So what I mentioned a few minutes ago of making yoga my full-time career coincided right around when we met. It was on its way to becoming my full-time job, but it was right in the moment. I don't know if you realize this, you're the first person I hired at Lifetime. So I teach exclusively at Lifetime Athletic, 3 different locations in Southern Orange County in California. But at the time I was in Las Vegas, and that's where we met.
This was 10 years ago.
It was 10 years ago. And so I had just started in the role. So you were the first person I had advised on hiring the team we had at the time, but I had not, but we'd already been then running for some time. But I had not really made the hiring decision. So you were the first person that I hired to the company where I've now been for 10 years. But though I appreciate credit for a lot, you really do. And this is important again for your viewers, for the people learning from this podcast. Mackenzie is a great example of how what matters most is our willingness to connect with people and be open and honest. I had yoga teachers working for me who had worked for us, who I knew had been yoga teachers for a decade plus. And I swear the first time I met Mackenzie, she connected with more people than people I had working for me had been yoga teachers for years. Like, you might not remember this, but your first day at Lifetime, you took class. And I swear by time you left, you'd met like 7 people. You were like, who are you? What's your name? It was lovely nice practice next to you. Where'd you get that bag? What's your name? Like, it was just, you were this whirlwind of like connection and love. And that really was it. I remember speaking with several other people at the time about that, of being like, one of the reasons we practice is to get people to engage with each other that way. That's why we do our own practice, to help ourselves learn to engage with people that way, And obviously it's one piece of a puzzle of integrating yourself and being loving and kind. Yoga is a small part of that, but that is one of the reasons we do it. And certainly in the context of where you're trying to create a new program, and the program was still pretty new, you need people like that. So there was a funny thing of like, I don't care if she can teach yoga. It's like, we want that energy in the room. That said, you could teach yoga. You were a terrific teacher. And open to feedback right away, engaged, wanted to learn what we were doing because it was slightly different than what most yoga teacher trainings teach people to do. And then again, you and I have spoken this a little. I also knew, and I think at the time, I remember this surprising you, I knew the person you'd trained with. I knew Cindy Lee, who is not that many people might still know who she is because she's not really teaching that much anymore. But it was a teacher in New York that I respected immensely and happened to have been my home studio the years I was living in New York City. It was her studio home, was where I went and practiced. I wasn't a teacher at the time, but it was where I felt at home. And Cindy's a funny, goofy person, but a legit, yogi. She's very, very serious about the practice. And so though she has a lighthearted demeanor, she's, I'm sure training her with her was pretty serious. And so there was a million reasons why we hired you. It wasn't like it's like blind faith. You just had a lot you'd already put into the practice.
Oh, well, thank you. I received that. And it's so crazy that it has already been 10 years and how much growth and change that's happened to us individually, and how I miss you. I miss you around Vegas. And I know our community also really misses you. And LA and the 3 clubs that you're running right now are so lucky to have you.
Oh, well, thanks, Mackenzie.
What is it like being in a leadership role like that, where you are opening new clubs all the time and at one time managing a group of people who've kind of got the hang of things and at the same time building it from ground zero?
That's a great question. It doesn't change that much from working with a small group to a larger group. To give credit where credit's due, my role, the Lifetime has made a lot of space for a lot of us who are still doing this role. Things are always shifting in a company this size. When they asked me to take on a third club in Orange County, a lot of the day-to-day management stuff, the administrative duties, reverted back to the studio managers. And because they needed to communicate directly with the yoga teachers, 5 days a week, where I might only be in the club 1 or 2 days a week, depending on where I am. So I have a lot of help, the people who are running the overall programs, the cycle, the studio, and yoga. So those delineations are specific to Lifetime, but they're pretty general. Lots of places one might make a living teaching yoga. Like if you're at a gym, if you will, or I think Lifetime at this point calls itself a athletic country club destination. Whatever name you give it, but in an environment where people are also cycling and swimming and lifting weights and training for this or training for that, right? Where there's multiple businesses happening under one roof, you will often have someone in charge of, there's layers of management, as there needs to be when you have that many clients. So I oversee and mostly coach yoga teachers and help run teacher trainings at the various locations when we hold them. But then it's just that it's scaled a little. It's the same job. And the nice thing is, in the end, it's a lot like this, what we're doing now. I take someone's class afterwards. If they're open to feedback, I give them feedback. If a member is upset about something, it usually is easier for that client or student, if you will. We say member, because, again, it's relative to the company that I work for. But when the student has an issue, sometimes it is more helpful for them to speak to the teacher's boss, not just because I might have more information. It also protects that teacher a little bit. Like if someone's going to yell at someone, I'd rather them yell at me than one of the teachers who has 30 other people to deal with that day. So in the end, whether you're speaking to students or to other yoga teachers, it's one-on-one interactions. So it doesn't change that much. There's just more of it.
In your position and how many yoga teacher trainings you've done, what would you say is the underscoring theme that crops up the most when working with teachers? Is there like 1 or 2 things that you tend to see that a lot of teachers really struggle with?
That's a great question. Well, I'll define my position. I think I haven't said. My current role is I am the yoga studio lead for the 3 clubs in Southern Orange County, right? We have multiple clubs in California. Lifetime Athletic is who I work for. Depending on the club, the newest one has Elise yoga classes. Laguna, which is one of the more established clubs in the company, has one of the more robust yoga schedules in the company. It's really, really busy. On a Tuesday with just 3 classes, I often teach 150 people yoga, just me. And there's 8 other classes that day. So, anywhere from 11 to 12 classes a day. So I oversee those 3 programs. I consult now. I don't have final say, but I consult on hiring teachers. The thing that challenges teachers the most when I interact with teachers and just watching and leading teacher trainings, knowing how to objectively evaluate what you were doing. Even if a teacher doesn't acknowledge that that's the case. The one person I know who's never taken my class is me, and I'll never get to. Mackenzie knows my class better than I ever will because she's been present in it. And that's the nice thing about that, is it goes, in both directions. There's a degree to which I understand Mackenzie's class in a way Mackenzie never will, because you've not taken your own class. And even if we record ourselves, which to your listeners, you all should, uh, even if you record yourself and listen back and evaluate it, the most effective way to learn is to get feedback from others. And yet, that's not going to happen every class. The vast majority of classes you teach, even if a teacher's present, you're not really going to have time. We try to do as much as we can in theory every class, but there might not be a teacher in every class. And people have lives. You're not going to always be able to make a tremendous amount of time for it. So how to take what you've learned about teaching and knowing which things you want to improve on, and then knowing whether or not you're implementing it. So basically trying to find a way to be objective about oneself and what you're delivering and why, and all of the different things that could fall under that larger umbrella about understanding what your voice is and how to make adjustments when you don't have another teacher present to give you feedback. If someone's there to give you feedback and they took your class, listen to them. They know more about your class than you do. But when there's not someone there, that's the thing I think helps people the most.
That's a great point. And we were kind of talking about that before we clicked record, that continuing education, in your words, you said this, is still so messy for teachers who graduate yoga teacher training. Then they feel like they're like, okay, now I know I need to start teaching. But where I came from, this place and space of tremendous support and celebration and collaboration with other teachers who are going through this process, now I feel like I've just been dropped in the center of the ocean. Like I've been slapped in the face with the Yoga Sutras and just pushed out the door like wham bam, thank you, ma'am, go do the thing. And it can feel very jarring, I think, to the nervous system of yoga teachers when they're like, I have this intense desire to share it as best as I can. And I know there's still a lot that I could learn. And that will happen, of course, through time and experience and through making all the mistakes. But for people who maybe are listening that aren't in a community or don't have somebody overseeing them, and you in a position like that can come in and give feedback, what might they do for themselves to, as you're speaking to, proactively participate in their own development, teacher development?
This isn't something I've answered before because no one's ever asked the question exactly that way. And it's a wonderful thing to ask. No, it is. Well, because like we were talking about before, it is kind of messy. What does continuing education look like? What does it look like for most people? A 300 hour. They do a 300 hour and then you get the 300 hour and you don't feel that much different after you did after your 200 hour. And then people say, we just have to teach a lot. And you say, but it's hard to get opportunities to teach sometimes. Or you teach and even then you don't feel like you're learning. So it's a wonderful thing to wonder, what can people do if they're not in a community or they're just getting started?
They can listen to Master Your Yoga Teaching podcast.
Listen to Mackenzie. Well, you joke, but you're a great example, though. When I met you, so I've practiced a lot of Ashtanga. To people that don't know me that are listening to this or watching this, I've practiced a lot of Ashtanga. When I say I started practicing yoga in 1998, that's probably not accurate. I think I took a yoga class when I was a teenager once. When I was 14, 15, I realized 20 years later what it was. It was someone who taught at a gym near my dad's house who had studied at a Shivananda yoga ashram. Once I learned, right, like once I understood that sequence, that set sequence, years later, they, their alternate version of the sun salutation, and then the postures that followed, which is, you take people who've never done yoga and you're trying to get them to do Mayurasana and shoulder stand. I realized later it was the sequence they do at Shivananda Studios, and he was just teaching it. It was actually lovely, but it didn't resonate with me. When I was like 21 or 22, I somehow, almost dumb luck, wandered into an Ashtanga primary series class, and that was that. I've practiced more or less 5 or 6 days a week since. Not Ashtanga. I've done a lot of other things, but when I met you, I don't think you'd practice much Ashtanga. And now it's a huge part of your viewpoint, how you teach. It's informed how you teach, though. Would you call yourself an Ashtanga teacher?
Yes, and.
Yes, and. Yeah, maybe, kind of. Yes, of course, but not. And then on the one hand, I'll say, oh, I'm not an Ashtanga teacher. And then the number of times I've gone to someone secretly, everything I teach is Ashtanga. Like it's however you look at it. So you're someone that I think is a good example of one of the first things I'd say, which is digest as much as you can about the traditional viewpoints. Understand, even if you don't claim something as your lineage. If you when I was teaching in Chicago, again, I had another full-time career I was going. I was pursuing theater. I was acting in plays, but I was teaching yoga quite a bit for supplementary income. I had never practiced Bikram. And again, it's not to get in any discussion about Bikram himself or the merit of the methodology or whatever, but it was at the time very ascendant. So many people practiced Bikram. And I would get asked about it, and I didn't want to have an uninformed opinion. So I did it 3 or 4 days a week for months. And then after, I'm not exaggerating, I mean, like the 26 and 2 or 2 and whatever they say it, 26 poses, 2 pranayamas. I did it for months and months and months. And then when I'm like, yes, absolutely, this is not for me and I'm done. But I had direct experience of the thing. And when I did it, I tried to do it on its terms, right? Like I did the poses as they were given. Whatever the teacher instructed, I did my best. The same with the other lineages. When I was living in Chicago, I also tried to twice a week. There happened to be in Chicago at the time a teacher whose only yoga teacher was Iyengar. He'd studied with Iyengar himself, with BKS Iyengar himself. And it's not that I'm talking about appealing to higher authority. I actually think to answer your original question, what can be so powerful is then take that viewpoint and make it your own. Walk your own path, make your decisions, reject what doesn't feel right to you, use what does. If something about it seems not appropriate for the students you're teaching, jettison that thing and find some other thing. I don't think we need to be beholden to a tradition, but at the same time, you can be a student when you allow yourself to surrender to something like that. So when I was studying with that Iyengar teacher, I did the practice as he gave it. Even if I was like, this doesn't feel so good in my body. So I think that having some understanding of the context, the history of these practices, how they spread. I know you spoke to our mutual friend Mayuri, who I talk to pretty often. Learn from people who grew up close to these cultures, who understand them on a very, very deep level. Seek out teachers who have studied these things, even if then you create something new on your own. So that's one way, because you understand where you're coming from, and it doesn't feel like you're having to invent whole cloth things. And a lot of these things have survived for so many hundreds of years because they work. So that's one. Practice. Just the kind of person you've always been as long as I've known you. A lot of us have to work very hard to get to that point. A big piece of the puzzle for me over the last few years has been really dedicating myself to what in classical Ashtanga yoga you would call the yamas and the niyamas. Though the framework I use is the ethical practices that are around Vipassana, right? What Buddhists would call Shila, right? So the 5 precepts. So making a huge commitment to do a better job practicing those every moment of every day has informed my daily life, and that then informs your teaching. A big thing I think is that a lot of people think they have to create a voice, like a viewpoint, and they have to every experience has to be a life-changing experience, and every moment has to be this huge thing. And sometimes there's something so comforting and welcoming about having a yoga teacher is doing the equivalent of going, hang on for 1 second, Mackenzie. Inhale, lift your arms over your head, bring your hands to the floor as you exhale. What were you saying? Like that there's not this weird shift into some strange gear where you're shouting to the rafters and every experience is life-changing. There's something about a practice that's a daily practice, and you're teaching people to help themselves. So if you aren't doing that, if you don't have a daily practice, if you're not actively taking the tools and trying to better your own life, how can you teach people to take the tools and better their own life? So it sounds like I answered with a lot of things, but I would say it boils down to 2. Learn as much as you can about the history, philosophy, the cultures these things came from, and then just practice every day. Teaching gets a lot easier if you start doing those 2 things.
Wow, great answers. So you mentioned and touched on feedback a little bit, that's something that you do is go teach or go take a class and then sit with that teacher and give a little feedback. Can you real quick kind of lay out what that could look like for people who maybe don't have a mentor or a coach and want to take themselves through the process a little bit so that they can actively participate and practice deliberately with the intent of getting better than the class before?
It's a great question. I would love to say that this is something I did before. I didn't really. I was teaching at a yoga studio in Chicago with an extraordinary teacher. one of the two teachers who owned the studio. He was Sting's yoga teacher at one point. Like Sting would fly into Italy to teach him yoga. I know, it's super random. And yet at the same time, this dude who like last time I saw him he was driving an Audi in Chicago and he waved at me. Like 20 years prior, he was living in India with no possessions. Like he's a fascinating guy. And I remember we went out to lunch one day and I said, hey, while we're here, I'd love feedback. Like how, like, cause he had happened to take my class and he looked at me like I'd grown a second head. He was loving it. He was just like, I guess, sure. Because it's just so not done mostly at yoga studios, even when people take your class. And I don't remember what he told me or not, because it really was the thing. When I got to Lifetime, I have to give the credit to the community of teachers here and the people that I work with and, for. We have a culture of feedback in which we do try to do it pretty often. So if someone took your class and you have the time, you can say, hey, I'd love feedback if you have it to give. What has helped so much is that we have a formal structure where one person gives, the teacher says, well, this is what I think went well, and these are the things I think you could work on. Then the person responds and says, well, yeah, these are the things that worked for me. This was great. That was great. This is where I couldn't hear you, or this was confusing, or I'm not sure why these two things happened, or we were in this one shape for a long time without counterpose. So you start with something affirming what the experience you had, and then follow with something that the teacher might work on next time. As a general rule, the unspoken rule is the teacher goes first. And that's about it. And even just that loose structure, though, keeps it from becoming personal. There's a lot of other things that are helpful. Try not to talk about, well, Mackenzie, when you teach, I think it's this. Like now it feels like I'm talking about you or it's something personal, instead of just saying, today during Sun B, the music was really loud and I couldn't hear you. And it was awesome what you were teaching, but I couldn't hear you. It's speaking directly to the experience you just had. So if you're not in a community of people who can give you feedback, have another yoga teacher take your class, or if one happens to, and then say, do you have 10 minutes? And say, I want to do a little feedback. If it's okay, I'll just tell you things that I thought went okay and some that didn't, and maybe you could do the same. It might get messy, and maybe they will unintentionally slide into saying things that feel a little too personal. And that's okay. But you could also just get a group of people and start practicing that on your own, or even just one person. As close as you can, follow a structure where you start with what was good, affirm something, and then work things that could be worked on next time, and try to keep it focused on the experience that was just had. And you'd be amazed how quickly, because so many baseline things, like people will stand behind a group of people and talk for 10 minutes. And if a friend is in your class, they'll go, that feels weird. Could you stand in front of us? And you just go, oh my God, I didn't even know I was doing that. So it can be really basic things like that. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's great. I would completely agree in saying that it really is the key to rapid growth, because as you're mentioning, you're so many things, especially when you're new and you're just trying to still figure out which hand is right, which hand is left. Like just getting the words out feels like tongue asana sometimes, let alone managing the environment of the room, let alone figuring out what to do with your physicality. It's just a lot of moving parts, like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, like just doing a lot all at once. And so all these things sometimes you're not even aware of. And so when you invite another person in, they can bring some things out of your blind spots into clear sight, so that you can either continue to do that thing that you're rocking, or engage or behave in a different way that might serve you and the students better. And the thing that I also think that it does is it really brings one or two things specifically into focus. And this applies to yoga teaching, but really to life. Sometimes when you don't have focus or clarity on what you want to work on right now, you end up kind of doing a lot of things not well. It's almost, you just have this like power of focus now, which helps so much.
Yeah, I agree completely. Because you have a discussion with another person about it, you then say, oh, I pace the room a lot. Okay, great. So for the next 10 classes, plant my feet wherever I'm speaking. That'll be my focus. And then eventually it becomes a new habit. You don't have to think about that thing anymore. You can build on that success. Yeah, that's a great point, that it focuses how you're trying to improve. Because I do think people do that. They just go, I just want to get better. Well, on what? What aspect of it? Well, first we have to separate the aspects, and all the conversations with other yoga teachers can help that. It's hard, if you're learning to play an instrument or learning to perform in any capacity or any skill where you might record yourself, it can be really miserable. That is a great thing to do to answer your earlier question about how can a teacher get started. It's really challenging, but record yourself teaching and listen to it. It's not super fun always if you're not used to hearing yourself on a microphone, but it's still really helpful.
Yeah, and we're not just talking to the newer yoga teachers. I think actually more seasoned teachers, dare I say, even complacent teachers. And I can say that because I've been in that space before too, where you're just going through, you're teaching so many classes, you've been doing it for so many years, and you get this sense of comfort, like, okay, I know my style, I know my techniques, my strengths. And you lean into those. And I think the feeling what that experience is like for that person is this sense of like boredom, I guess, is how it arrives for me, is when I feel bored in my teaching. I used to kind of beat myself up about that and then overthink it and be like, am I not supposed to be doing this? And then I kind of switched my perspective and was like, no, actually, I think this is just feedback again from my soul, from my heart, that it's time to learn something new, or it's time to come back to the growth mentality and be open to looking deeper into what I'm already doing, to that new, that lower level of what else you can do.
Absolutely. You bring up something, was two things I want to say. Relevant to what you just said, I think there's a degree to which it's probably a good sign if you're a little bored with your class pretty often. I mean, at this point, how many Ashtanga Sanes do you think you've done, Mackenzie? Just could you? You could, and you could probably grab a calculator and kind of figure it out. Like if there's 5 Sanes and you do Ashtanga practice 6 days a week, and you've done Ashtanga for however many years, much less than you teaching it on and on, I mean, tens of thousands of times. Many of your students can count on one hand the number of times they've tried a sun salutation. It's still new to them. And the practices I'm doing in my own personal journey, my yoga practice looks like at 4:30 in the morning, is not what I'm teaching, nor should it be. Right? Like relative to my own body, my age, my experience with the practices, the weight given to pranayama and meditation over perhaps asana wouldn't have made sense 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And so I'm not teaching my own practice. I'm helping people, again, walk away with the tools to build their own practice, even if they're doing it in your class. The whole point is to a certain extent, put yourself out of a job. People will still come. They'll still want to be in the community. People will keep practicing. But if after a few years you haven't shared these things with them, then again, you're probably leaning too hard into novelty, like maybe be a little bored with your class. And then when you start to notice that, like Mackenzie just said, like you just said so well, dive deeper into what you're doing. Learn what are the subtlest nuances of these 9 shapes, to use the sun salutation as an example. What are these 9 shapes that you've done 10,000 times? How mindfully can you do them? With how much awareness of the sensitivity of where you're placing your weight and so on, how they're connected to breath. The other thing you said that I wanted to comment on, you mentioned really, experienced teachers. And I'm prone to making jokes and being very serious for your podcast, but like I was like, can we throw shade on your podcast? No, I won't. I have an instructive story that I teach in teacher training. I share this in teacher trainings. There was a teacher, and I won't say the teacher's name, but a teacher who was famous to the degree that a yoga teacher can be famous, like hugely influential in the yoga world, like a teacher's teacher, as people say. And I knew who they were, and I had knew people that were direct assistants of theirs, and I'd never taken a workshop from that person. And I finally had the opportunity. Within the first 45 minutes, and this was a workshop, a very long workshop, taught in a way most of us don't teach, where you're stopping class and saying, everyone gather around, let's look at this pose and that pose. Totally valid for a workshop, maybe not for classes. And I'm sure you've addressed that at some point in this podcast, or will, right? Like maybe not the ideal to stop the class in a class setting, but in a workshop, it made sense. And so wonderful, I'm on board. And this teacher stops the class 2-3 times. Or more by that point, right? So by halfway through the workshop, having multiple times had us all stop and watch, I realized that they were calling multiple students by the name Missy. They were just saying Missy. Not like that, Missy. No, do this. Nope, that's it, Missy. Like they kept using the word Missy. And my sarcastic self, it just in my head, I remember going, the statistical likelihood of all of three of those grown women being named Missy seems really low. I bet they have a name. And it sounds like I'm being overly harsh. I don't think I am. It was really like unloving and sort of, however playfully or light-hearted it was meant, it wasn't very kind. And it was a little bit demeaning, because this is like the triangle pose you're helping them with. I know that person, they're a mom. That triangle pose is not the hardest thing they have to do today. Like, ask their name. Don't say Missy. And that's a good example. Now, here's the thing. This is a teacher, again, has probably been teaching for 30, 40 years. And people then eventually end up insulated where no one gives them feedback, or they don't ask for it, or who knows, I don't know. And if that something like that ever, if you were in California or I was in Vegas and you were in my class and I was unintentionally speaking down to students, making them feel less than, or even using language that had the risk of doing that, I would pray you'd tell me. And I would hope you'd say, hey, Eric, you should probably use that person's name instead of that like diminutive, and that's a great example of how it has to never stop. However long you teach, you have to keep trying to get better. And by better, everyone might have their own definition. The one for me is how can you be more loving? How can you be more honest? How can you be more compassionate? Because that in the end is we're in service of the students. And the more compassionate you can be, I know so many, I've been around, as I mentioned, yoga for a really long time. And I've had the opportunity to be in class with a lot of teachers who have huge social media followings. Very often, though, I studied with that teacher's teacher. And in many instances, those people keep improving their whole lives. And sometimes people get really tense and sort of crystallized, right? Like they have this message, this is the thing. It's like this product they're delivering. And they're no longer thinking like, what did this person go through on their way to class? How is this thing that's happening to them now, this experience they're having, going to help them when whatever happens later happens? Because whatever's going on, whatever's happening in your class, the pose you're teaching someone or the sequence you're teaching someone is not the hardest thing they're going to do that day. And so our job is like to be this like little place where however hard we might work physically, it's just love and compassion and celebration. As soon as it turns into, I have the truth and I'm going to teach you how to do the yoga, you're like, that's a failure of compassion. And so those two things, like, don't be afraid to get a little bored, like dive deeper into what you're doing. And even if you become a very seasoned teacher, or if you're listening to this and are a very seasoned teacher, ask someone for feedback. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, so good. I was speaking about this with a previous podcast guest named Jivana Heyman. The whole message there is on accessible yoga and making yoga more inclusive. It was really a powerful discussion, but we were talking about how things like humility and really even mastery, which is the name of the podcast. And I bring this up again because it's worth repeating. It's not anything that you can ever really attain. It's a constant recalibration. It's a constant refinement that never ends. And the second that you think that you've arrived there, you've taken 5 steps back. And so it can save you from, in your words, like losing that compassion, losing that humility, and keeps you on the road to mastery, even if it just feels like the end of a race where the finish line keeps getting further and further away forever and always. But that's the journey, is to, you only put the ceiling there yourself.
I think you just said it well. If there is such a thing as mastery in any activity, it's the person who commits to lifelong learning and then develops a technique for themselves, because everyone's is going to be different, to continuing to learn, whatever that means to you. And I made the joke, we were joking about clown at the beginning, and that's why I still study that art form. Of all the things I've done in my whole life, pursuant to performance, outside of yoga and meditation and philosophy and study, but from a performance standpoint, of all the things I've ever tried to learn to do, whether it was dancing or playing an instrument or acting a play or paint a painting, learning to clown is the single hardest thing I've ever done. It is miserable. the training makes you uncomfortable. You are signing up for hour after hour of just deep discomfort. And that's why I still do it whenever I can. These days, I have a family, and it's very hard to find the time to really commit. But I did a 3-day workshop earlier this week, and the class show was Wednesday, and like I said, it was just abject failure, just complete stupidity. But people laughed, and that's the point. But it's very hard training because it involves a kind of authenticity and honesty. And I know someone is in a show like this, and a lot of very serious clowns. Can I talk about Colin?
Don't make me talk about my husband.
Well, your incredibly talented husband, right? He's an amazing performer, but he's not in the show he's in. He wouldn't be considered a clown, right? But he works with Petra is an astonishing clown, like amazing performer. And I studied with someone that she worked with for many years, a guy named Aitor Basuri. And like Aitor is one of the funniest human beings I've ever met. The workshop I did with him, I cried for 2 days afterwards. It was just miserably hard, because learning to be funny is just learning to be more and more and more and more honest and exposed. And so the training in it makes you uncomfortable. And so something you've probably heard me say, we've led a teacher training together. We've been around each other during teacher trainings, right? If you aren't spending time with your own edge, how do you have any business guiding people to their edges? And so the truth is, if you've practiced yoga for a few decades, the asana and even the concentration, right? You've probably mastered a lot of those things. You can keep your attention on your breath for many minutes at a time. You know a dozen pranayamas, internal energetic exercises. You meditate for an hour every morning. Wonderful. Keep doing all of those things. But if you want to work on mastery, to use the name of your podcast, then you have to find maybe other ways to stay uncomfortable so that you're always learning.
That's so good, Eric. And I love that you make it clear that it's in that discomfort and that exposure. I like that you use that word, exposure, and that vulnerability, that's where it's at, baby, that growth. It's so good. So the point is, everybody, come to Vegas for clowns and feedback. You can also get it in LA with Eric.
And take Mackenzie's class. We started with our little mutual admiration society talking about how great each other was. It was lovely, but I will land on, you came here to California and taught a class for us. How long ago was that?
That was before I had Finn. So, oh my gosh, how could it already be almost a year ago? I think it was in the summer.
3 days ago, someone mentioned you, one of my members.
Are you serious? What'd they say?
Yeah, it just occurred to me. That just was positively talking about you, because I have one class a week where I do a gentle introduction to intermediate. And so people still ask about it because you gave them a much more hard-edged version, which was great. It was wonderful. It gave me, for the next 6 months, though, I was like, well, wow, you jumped right to here. And they were like, oh, we want to do more of that. So I then worked my way back up to it. But you did open the door to doing much. We do much more of it now. I started introducing some of the stuff that comes later in the second series. Maybe not the actual postures, but the conditioning for it. So, but a million things. No, people loved it. And I had known you for a long time, and it was not the teacher I knew when you first started teaching for us. You were a great teacher then, but you really had, it was so obvious you just kept working every day between then and now. So, or a year ago, whenever it was. It's already been a year.
No, I really appreciate that. And to continue making myself uncomfortable is to start this podcast. I have expressed this on the podcast before. I've talked about it in social media. It feels so strange to put master your yoga teaching and then also a picture of myself as if I could possibly. It just feels like such a daunting and overwhelming task. And I also don't want anybody to ever think that I have all of the things figured out, but I have the curiosity and I also hold the responsibility that if I'm going to sit in the seat of a teacher, that I have to keep growing, and that so many amazing teachers are out there doing so many things right, or they're doing something right now because they did so many things wrong and they learned from that. And so the more conversations and connections that we can have and say, this is what my experience has been like, or this happened, this is how I survived through it, we all grow together. And in that regard, everybody wins. And you have been such a profound piece of that of my personal puzzle. And I'm just so, so grateful to you.
Well, I am to you as well. And this is a wonderful project. I think it's a terrific thing to do. And you absolutely are someone that continues learning and has a huge body of knowledge. And I think it's wonderful you're sharing it. And on the note too of what you said too about how many amazing teachers there are out there, because another thing is people might listen to this too and like, how can I have opportunities and stand out a little? Keep in mind, as much as yoga, and I've been around for a lot of what people call the yoga boom. A lot of people believe that's now that wave may have broken. I don't think so. Because I work for a business that keeps track of everything, right? Like the fraction at the busiest lifetime, I can't say out loud the exact numbers, right? But at the busiest lifetime yoga studio that I work for in the company, out of however many, like there's some nearing 200 gyms and growing, like at the busiest one, it's still a very small fraction of the number of people that practice yoga. And that's still reflected in the population. If you really think about your friends and family, how many have a consistent several day a week practice? It's still so small. So the idea that like the market's saturated and there are too many teachers and this and that, I can tell you that is not true. Sometimes the initial place you think you might want to teach might not be able to hire you. We have someone that teaches now. She's in Eli for us exclusively for lifetime. She gets her health insurance for us. When she first did teacher training 7 years ago, we couldn't hire her. We didn't have we don't have a lot of turnover. She took what she'd learned in our teacher training and went to the senior home that one of her grandparents was in, adapted what we call the 7 doorways, our technique for building a class. She adapted what she'd learned in the teacher training, had never done chair yoga, had never done senior yoga, and was like, well, what would feel good? I'm with my grandmother all the time. What could she do? She started teaching at the senior center. The residents loved it so much. The staff was like, we want to pay you if you'll keep doing this. She was initially doing it for free, and they were like, we'd like to pay you. Well, then the activities director for that place said to another senior home, we have this amazing yoga teacher. And that second place paid her a lot more than the first one. And the next thing you knew, I went to hire her and she was like, ooh, my schedule is kind of full. I'm not kidding. She now teaches for us a ton, but she just within 6 months of teacher training created an opportunity for herself. And then I couldn't pay her what some of the locations she was teaching at pay her. And so she was like, and she also adores doing it. She really found the thing, unexpectedly found a love, which was like, she teaches sun salutations just standing there with a chair and like, using the chair for balance and just lifting your arms and leaning a little forward. And she went and did senior yoga and chair yoga workshops and stuff after. Like she didn't wait. She just had the guts to go, I'm going to trust my intuition and my empathy and figure it out. And so there's still so much need. And then she's asked other yoga teachers that teach for us to cover her classes at the senior centers. Like, yeah. So there's so much opportunity. So there is need for this. And you are amazingly qualified. So I'm glad you're doing it.
Well, for the very last thing, I feel like you've actually spoken to many qualities probably that you're looking for because you're in a position that hires, or I guess observes, maybe auditions.
I used to do the actual hiring, now less so, but I still very much, am part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what would you say is the one thing that you really look for? And this kind of goes back to, I guess, the story of even me auditioning and what you saw in me. But for those that are listening that are on the brink of deciding to go for that audition, what are you really looking for in a teacher and what makes them stand out?
That is a tough thing to answer because the answer could sound vague. So I won't land. The answer a little bit is you just know. That's not helpful to people who have a role like mine where you're hiring your teachers, you're trying to put together a team. Maybe you find yourself in that position. I just lost a teacher to that role. Got hired by someone for another company to open studios for them. Wonderful. So that skill is part of making this your living. So I won't land on you just know. What it is, you can't fake having practiced. It as much as reps of teaching help, as much as, I have this story and I have that story and I have a playlist and I know exactly what verbs I choose and where I stand and all of that technical stuff is important and all of it has to be in place. It does. That's easy. That is relative. Learning to stand where people can hear you, and like, you're a singer. Mackenzie, if any of the listeners don't know, is an amazing singer. Like, where you aim the instrument, those people can hear you. The people behind you can't hear you, right? You aim your voice the way you'd aim a megaphone, right? That's important for a yoga teacher, but that's relatively easy to fix. If you're talking into a corner of the room and 3/4 of the room can't hear you, turn around, right? You can fix that after a few attempts. The whole list, you can fix those things. And they do have to be in place. The technical aspects of delivering a class experience. What you cannot fake is if you have spent time practicing. And I would argue, because people's time is so limited, you have to take from other teachers, but even then it's self-practice. The thing, like a relationship to these practices is like, to use an image that one of my mentors in dance would use, is like lighting a candle inside a cathedral, right? A cathedral is just cold stone and glass and architecture and angles and mass until you light a candle and the light shines out through the stained glass windows, right? And then it's just something breathtaking, right? The thing that lights it up from the inside is that you closed your eyes, said your mantra, or if you don't say mantra, whatever it is you do, you did the thing. And not because someone else was watching and not because anyone else was present, but because you have a relationship to these things. And so practice, like that's the big thing. Do get the technical stuff, be able to be heard, decide whether or not to demo. If you do demo, know why, make sure you aren't making people feel judged. I'm sure a lot of this is addressed already in your podcast. The one thing I would emphasize, if it hasn't been emphasized, is practice. And if you're already someone that does a ton of asana, or you prefer to do asana in a group, wonderful. Take up a meditation practice. Find a technique that works for you and work it. But you can't fake that part. And that's the part when someone goes, you just kind of know. You do. Like when I met you, you didn't have a lot of experience with it. You were in love with the practice. And my guess is you were practicing. I think you were touring at the time. I bet you practiced wherever you were.
In the bowels of the ship, baby.
But I didn't know that about you. And yet, if someone had said, you want to make a wager, I'd have been like, whatever money I have on me. That's a person who's practicing on their own because they love the practice. And that's the part, often the part that's very hard to put your finger on. It really is. And like, once you've taught long enough, that's the thing you'll notice. Like the teachers that teach for the longest and develop the biggest followings are the ones who are invested in the practice because they want to create a change in their life, whatever that change is. And once you've done that, well, then someone goes, hey, could you help me? You can go, well, maybe, but here's what helped me. Like, now you try it and go do it yourself, but this is what helped me. And that's what to me is teaching, right? I'm not telling people how to see the world. I'm sharing notes I have from what I've done.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great, Eric. Thank you. And for those that are like, what do you mean the bowels of the ship? I used to work on a cruise ship, and I would quite literally go to the third and below decks where the crew is. People would be walking by and they're like, oh yeah, there's that blonde girl doing those funny shapes again. I'm like in the corner somewhere just doing my practice. Oh, but thank you so much, Eric, for coming on the podcast. Can you share with the listeners how they can plug into you and your community if they are really resonating and vibing with what you're saying? Do you have one?
Dude, come if you're in Southern California and buy a day pass to a lifetime, I guess. I am not. This is another maybe last thing. I don't want to talk for too long, and you can always edit it down. Uh, I make a joke to people that work with me, and Mackenzie knows this, and I've worked on this actually. This context, it actually makes sense, but I will say to people up front when they first meet me, I'll say, I will talk to you about yoga until you have to walk away. You need to just don't change the subject. Don't talk to me about meditation and yoga. But that said, I don't have any social media. I have no social media, and I'm not saying, I don't say that like it's some badge of honor. If I needed it for my job again, which I did at one time, I would have it. And most people do have to promote themselves that way. But I mention it because remember, you don't have to. You don't. Like, it's not the only path. And I think a lot of people have started to think it is. It's not the only way to make your living sharing these practices. It's one way and maybe becoming one of the more common ones, but it's not the only way. So at least right now I teach here, and that's really about it. I don't have any other aspect of it that I have to promote. So, yeah, you Just put dama.org in the show notes.
Go take a Vipassana retreat.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do.
Or don't. I mean, maybe it might help. I don't know. It helped me.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Eric. It's always lovely to be in your energy. I adore you. I love you. And to all the listeners, I also love you. Thank you for coming back each and every week. And until next Wednesday, namaste blessed. Thanks for listening. If this is your first time, peruse our feed to see if there's something else that will serve you. We're so grateful that you're here and invite you to join our inner circle by subscribing to our newsletter. If this episode resonated with you, help us spread the word by sending it to a friend who needs to hear this message. Likes, follows, sends, shares, and reviews help us to continue delivering high-quality content to you for free each and every week. Don't forget to tag @MasterYourYogaTeaching so we can reshare. I am a certified yogi. However, this podcast is intended for information and entertainment only. If you are interested in mentorship or coaching with me, check out the website linked in the show notes to get more information. This content and other content produced by CLW Studios and affiliated partners is not therapy, and nothing in this content indicates a therapeutic relationship. Any opinions of guests on the podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of Mackenzie or CLW Studios. Learn more about Mackenzie, her guests, and CLW Studios by following the links in the show notes. Keep shining, and we will see you next Wednesday for another dose of Master Your Yoga Teaching. Namaste blessed. Are you feeling stuck? If so, this is your exclusive invite to Vortex Yoga Retreat in Sedona, Arizona, this October 11th through 14th, 2024. Sedona's breathtaking red rocks transform into a fiery masterpiece in the autumn. Imagine practicing yoga amidst this stunning backdrop, feeling the ancient vortexes amplify your intentions and awaken your spirit. This retreat is for you if you crave a deeper connection with your energetic body, the chakras, you're ready to align your life with purpose and passion, or you seek a transformational experience to unleash your inner power. Here's what awaits you. 4 days and 3 nights nestled in Sedona's beauty, daily yoga and meditation, delicious local dinners, sound healing, hiking to infamous Sedona vortexes, connection with like-minded souls on this empowering journey, learn chakra balancing principles and practices, and a special gift from your hosts. Don't wait. Space is extremely limited and spots are going fast. Visit rachakaretreats.com/Sedona to book your spot and choose your accommodations, or click the link in the show notes. Use code MYYT for 10% off. Are you ready to balance your energy and align your life?